Good evening, Battle Creek, and thank you for joining us for this episode of Our View, the show that tries to bring the voice of poverty to the table and look at how policies, structures, systems are affecting our families in Battle Creek, Michigan. Today joining us is Dr. Nakia Bayless, who is the executive director of the Village in Battle Creek, but she also has this other little fun title we found on the website, which is Network Weaver and System Change Strategist. I love that title. I love everything that it implies. I love it. We also have with us, of course, our staff, Valerie Whitney, our program coordinator, Kayla Johnson, work experience trainer, and Mia Henry, work experience trainer, and then Dylan Rank, volunteer, co-op graduate, work experience entrepreneur. Thanks for joining us today. So, of course, what we want to talk about today is poverty and how it affects families in Battle Creek. But due to Black History Month, we'd like to talk about how, yes, we know from running Women's Co-op, every family in poverty suffers from social and economic disparities and inequities. But when we talk about Black families, there is a whole nother layer. It's wider, it's deeper. There are the embedded biases within systems. Can we talk about this a little bit, Nakia?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think, at this time, folks are reflecting, right, on their experiences through the pandemic and what the pandemic really did for communities of color. Particularly the Black community, is to highlight some of the disparities and inequities that people of color have been navigating historically and consistently, right, and continue to. And what it did was it really put a pause on true capitalism. And I'm going to call your attention to that because I think that is the root cause of a lot of the classism and inequities and racism, all the isms, lots of isms in our country. And something that I heard said on the 1619 project that Nicole Hannah-Jones recently produced is capitalism is based on the exploitation of labor. What the pandemic did was put a pause to that exploitation. But what it also did was allow others to feel that exploitation that we've been experiencing. So while there was this privilege in a way for some folks to reemerge from the pandemic and execute or activate their personal agency of choice to say, you know what, I'm no longer going back into those organized, those traditional structures.
Right. I'm going to migrate. I'm going to do this great migration. I'm going to pick a field. I can dream.
Yes. Yes, we're seeing that. And unfortunately, in communities of color, we reemerge to the same inequities and disparities magnified. And so...
Magnified in what ways?
So, for example, poverty around food scarcity. Let's talk about food scarcity. For example, there's many systems that we can talk about: housing, food, education, economics, all of the above, right? But just plucking out one of those as an example, food scarcity, communities of color really had brought trauma into a already traumatic experience. You see. And so as there was already experiences of the food scarcity, and there was a movement around the pandemic for folks to show up, for our community to really come together. And that's one of the foundations of the Village Network, is that it does take a village. It takes all of us. We were all given gifts, every single person, and it's meant, we were designed philosophically and otherwise to come together and bring our gifts into space with one another. Right.
And I want to clarify something about the Village Network. Although most of the leaders who are engaged as leaders in the network are leaders of color, and really part of the mission is to raise up other leaders of color to create a more diverse community of leaders that represent the community that they're serving. This is not something that is exclusive to the Black community, because we need to do this as a community. And white folk need to be the allies in that.
Yes, allies, and go even further, to accomplice. become accomplices in this work.
I
right?
like that.
Not just
What is the difference between an ally and an accomplice?
voice versus activation.
Okay.
So
Talk to us about that.
So an ally will say that they're supporting and show up in voice only,
Right.
but an accomplice is right there with us. They're in the trenches with us.
Doing the work that
They're
you're
doing the work with us. We're walking side by side, hand in hand, together to accomplish the same goals. At the end of the day, and I want to lift up one of the things that I think is critical that we're highlighting right now, Black History Month and the experiences of Black residents in Battle Creek. But I do, to your point, want to make it clear that we are about collective liberation. And so that means that we do have some shared experiences. And while, nationally we're recognizing Black history during a month, we're walking this every day.
Absolutely.
We're living
Thank
this
you for
every
saying
day.
that. And I want to say, too, because I think that, and I'm just speaking for what I know from my circles, nobody hate the white lady out there. None of my friends chastise me later at dinner for this, but when I'm having conversations, white people do get really uncomfortable with, well, if we're talking about raising up Black leaders, what happens to all the white leaders? Nobody's trying to push white leaders out of the way in this. We're saying, if you are a white leader and you have a place of power, then share that power with somebody who doesn't. We're not asking you to leave and give your reign to someone. We're asking you to mentor someone in your community that you can also raise up and make a leader. Correct?
Well, and absolutely. And what you're really speaking to is not sharing that power, I think, because that's a myth that power has to be shared. We have power.
Right.
We have our own power. We have to exercise that muscle and execute that power. And our accomplices and our allies need to acknowledge their power and privilege. That's it. Once we get to a place where we can acknowledge it, name it, and have some shared language around it, then we can get to resolution. Then we can get to recognition. And I will say that's part of our plight, right? And we look at it kind of in three tranches, and that would be reconstruction through relationshiping, partnering differently with our community partners, partnering authentically with our community partners, resolution, and that shows up through the work of our leaders and our organizations that are out here on the ground daily and at night when nobody else is up and awake. They are out there on the ground, helping folks through traumatic experiences, and then recognition through advocacy and celebration of the resiliency and strength that, quite frankly, has become a living legacy of all of our communities of color. We've had no choice but to have hope, find hope, to see to have gratitude, and find the gifts in times of struggle. And so, we rallied during the pandemic. Especially we seen that show up in Battle Creek around the food scarcity piece, right? We saw folks show up with boxes and boxes of food to hand out to hundreds of families. Just because the pandemic has officially or unofficially ended does not mean that we should stop showing up in that same spirit.
I feel you, sister, all the time. But we wouldn't be co-op right now if we didn't shift this conversation to systems. Because it is where we do the bulk
Yes,
of our
ma'am.
work.
Yes.
And I think, for me, it is just mind-boggling at times to hear that it's not just something that we're experiencing in our own office to see that our families of color face greater challenges when involved in the criminal justice system, when involved in the child welfare system. We're experiencing this, like you said. We're walking with these families and firsthand experiencing it. What does the Village Network have on the horizon to work with local systems to start getting at some of these things? Because,
Absolutely.
it's mind-boggling to me, again, that this is not just a local thing, right? Like, we've discovered it in our own data, looked at each other across the office and went, oh, look at this data locally. Like, this is terrible. But then to know that the state data matches it, the national data matches it. Recently, there was programming on the Good Morning show, and they talked about how everybody in this country is outraged because we separated these Latino families at the border, and we ripped the children from the parents and we separated them. And I too sat there and went, geez, we do this in this country every day. Like, I see it, I experience it. And it is Black families who suffer at the greatest level for this. So what's on the horizon to reshape some of these systems locally?
Absolutely. Well, I'm always happy to talk about the work that our leaders are out here doing. We have 10 organizations right now that are doing phenomenal work grounded in education justice, economic justice, and social justice. And we really were intentional about not just identifying our priorities around justice and the achievement of justice in those areas, because that looks very different than just simply providing some programs and services that will help achieve some things. We're getting at systemic change. We're getting at true sustainable change, right? And so what you will be able to see is our members are, we have workforce development programs and partnerships in place, KCC, Women's Co-op, Michigan Works, working really closely with our system partners to identify.
And focusing on, we want to put every person in Battle Creek that wants a job to work, like Dylan, through our training programs, Mia, Kayla, focused on that. But we are focused on the fact that there are challenges for BIPOC communities that need to be recognized. Yes, again, right, there are barriers for people in poverty, but those barriers shift and change and grow wider when we're talking about Black families.
Ooh, can I jump in?
And so you can jump in, because the consortium is making us all very aware of that.
Yes.
And giving voice to it.
Yeah, and I think one, just from my tiny little, well, I don't want to call it tiny, but from my tiny little space that I have as far as being a part of co-op and training.
Girl, that space is big.
It is ginormous, but just from my little corner in the world, okay? It's small in the world. But it's crazy when I have an African-American woman, I won't say her name, but Lord, is she amazing. Anyway, so she comes in, and I feel like she has this, kind of like what you said, embedded extra layer, that she comes in and immediately doesn't even consider the front desk or any other sort of training. She immediately just goes to our janitorial program, which is a beautiful program. It's an amazing program, 100%. But for her specifically, I would just, I don't know. Just with her, I was just no. We're going to put you on the front desk. And it's amazing. Putting her on the front desk, gave her this level of confidence. The first couple of days, she was, still kind of nervous and anxious. And you could tell, she was wearing something that you couldn't visibly see. And just, watching her kind of, be in a space where everybody loves her, and we don't, whatever you're wearing, that's cool, whatever you did this morning, that's cool, you show up, you're a great person, you treat us with respect, we treat you with respect, and you do an amazing job, and you could literally do this, and just giving her the opportunity
and the courage
to put herself in that space that I don't think she was going to allow for herself. Just being a part of those moments had just been just really cool, because I don't always have the same experience with another a Caucasian woman who you don't see those gears turning that way, and it is interesting to see those differences.
It's part of the acknowledgement of capitalism, how this country was grounded in, right? And it really was the exploitation of labor, and you have to think about the internalized oppression that has now resulted as a result of many, many years of this exploitation, particularly with Black and brown folks often only having the most undesirable jobs available. And so what that does internally, it gets into your DNA, and then it becomes a generational kind of cycle that occurs. And so what we're advocating for is for our allies and accomplices to recognize their privilege, acknowledge their privilege, and that is also within our own communities as well, within communities of color, recognizing our privilege, right? I come with privilege, education.
Sharing those experiences, as Dylan talked about, like you talked about earlier, sharing the experiences of sitting in these training programs, making a meal and breaking bread and talking about Because before you were in the training program there, you probably did have experiences with Black culture and history
Yeah,
within
I
your
mean,
friend network, but some people do not, correct?
Right. I was just fortunate, like the school I went to and like growing up in Battle Creek and like the places that we lived, like just being able to experience so many different cultures, like not even just white or Black, but like Hispanic culture or the Asian culture, just like different nationalities. It was always really, really cool to like take those different pieces of like their family lifestyles or the way they cooked meals and bring that home and then like, share that experience with my family or just dive deeper into it. It was always a really cool experience.
I think
Thank
what
you.
would be.
I think, and, well,
Oh, thank you for that too, because I think what would be even, I think where we're at right now, if we even go peel back the onion even deeper and say, I want to understand your experience and even shopping for the ingredients to buy that,
Right, exactly.
to make that meal.
Absolutely.
Because we're coming into spaces with layers of additional weight.
Right.
And that's through racial biases that come into the space with us. So, maybe not even having foods that are culturally relevant
Right.
at our local shopping centers, grocery centers, or having learning materials that allow our children to see other children learning that look like them.
Right.
Going into
or people
social
teaching
services.
them that
Right.
look like them, or
Right.
going into a social service agency
having someone
and
serve
seeing
you.
someone serve you that looks like you. Folks, I love these shows, but this is one that I think that we probably could do an hour-long show on, but we need to wrap it up. I appreciate all of our guests today, and Dr. Nakia, I appreciate you as always and the work that you're doing. I hope that we all continue to learn and be educated about who we are as a community as a whole. So understanding that it's people at all levels, even those who may be sleeping under the bridge, are also residents of Battle Creek and need to be considered in the grand scheme of things, right, Mia?
Embrace humanism.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And lastly, I just want to give a plug, Mia does, to some of our Black leaders in the community who recently did book releases.
Yes. We have book releases, one called Heal Our Way, written by Dr. Alicia Johnson, PhD, our own Alicia Johnson. We have another one, Black and White Voices, written by J.R. Reynolds and L.E. Johnson II. Again, that's called Black and White Voices. And then another one, The Heart-Shaped Herb and Afro-Resilience, written by L.E. Johnson II. I like that.
Phenomenal.
Wakanda forever.
Absolutely phenomenal. J.R. Reynolds and Alicia Johnson were actually both at one time board presidents of Women's Co-op. So
And Dr.
we get
Johnson
to
is
claim
also on
them
my
at some
board.
level.
Yes.
She is on your board.
Yes.
She is also one of my best girls, so I just love her to pieces, as is Dr. Bayless over there. So thank you again, Battle Creek, for joining us. If you have a topic that you want us to consider or you want to give an opinion, we're open to it. And until next time, we'll see you. So again, thank you for joining us tonight, Pastor Joe Hooper from Faith Temple. We want to shift our conversation now and talk about the celebration and resilience of Black culture in our community. And so I know you're fully prepared to talk to us about what some of those celebrations are and what Battle Creek does to highlight those. So,
Yes, well, thank you. I'm very happy to be here and give a little information regarding what the Battle Creek community has been doing. One of the most popular events that we recently held was the Kwanzaa. And so Kwanzaa is basically an African-American celebration of culture. And that Kwanzaa was established back in 1977 by Maulana Karenga. And he felt like the Black people needed a special day to celebrate themselves. And in that celebration, he offers 3 or 4 components. And that was ingathering, like people coming together, and then commemoration is thinking and living, centering in on the past, and then celebration, and that would be to come together to enjoy the festivities. And and then, so when we combine those things, we have a 7-day event that occurs the day after Christmas, and it goes right through the new year. And it kind of stemmed from the cultural points from Africa, which was the first fruit, and that's the meaning of Kwanzaa. It's the first fruit celebration. And
So the first fruit of harvest. Basically.
yes, yes. And so we adopt that as a struggle here in America because our culture was stripped during the slave trade, and so we adopt cultures from Africa, but we are African Americans, and so we have like two cultures coming together, and so we can all celebrate it because whether we're just African Americans or but America is a nation of cultures, and so we all learn to celebrate one another, each culture, and so the principles is what's most important of the celebration, and 7 principles we have is Umoja is one, and that stands for unity, and then we have Kujichagulia, and that stands for self-determination. Ujima is collective work and responsibilities. Then we have Ujamaa, which means cooperative economics. And then Nia, which stands for purpose. Kuumba is creativity. And finally, we have Imani, which is faith. And so when we think about cultures, just about every culture wants to instill those values or those principles in the people, so that we'll always have that cultural aspect to our communities. And so, as part of the principles, we practice it during the Kwanzaa season, but we wanted to carry out throughout the year. So every day you wake up, you want to think about unity, and then you want to be self-determined. And so all of those things, all those principles, we learn to adapt and to adjust so that we might be able to better ourselves and our community.
And I like what you said about you don't have to be black to celebrate black culture or black history, right? Like it's important to all of us, as all cultures in America are. Like it's important for us to embrace all those cultures.
Yes, yes.
I really love the principles and the values behind it.
Yes.
I often think when we think about the history and the premises of Women's Co-op, we have this culture of each one teach one, and helping your sister out, and this unity and this common voice. And I often think that that's something that's steeped in black culture.
Yes, yes.
Black families learned to do this generations and generations and generations ago.
Right, right. Because historically speaking, the culture was passed down, and families coming together and talking. There wasn't a lot of writing down of culture.
Right.
And so it was like passed on through, say, the spokesperson in the family. And that goes on today in each culture. And the principles are universal. And that's why other cultures are able to understand and appreciate those cultures, those practices.
What do we do in Battle Creek to celebrate Kwanzaa?
Yeah, so during our Kwanzaa celebration, we have activities at different venues, and people come together. Sometimes we highlight that particular day, say like cooperative economics, where we might have 3 or 4 different groups coming together and projecting that on the community as far as businesses and things like that. I think one of the things that was inspired by the Kwanzaa celebration was that we was able to develop a business list of a group of residents that did business. So a lot of times people don't know what's going on in the community. And the other principle is like faith. The last principle is faith. So that's why it's not a religious celebration or event, but we exercise our faith in believing and trusting in our institutions. And so when you trust and believe in the right of each one, then we're able to grow up with the feeling that this is our community because we have input, we see justice, the inclusion, and all of those things. And
We
so
see
that
people
makes
in
a
power
race.
that look like us.
Yes.
Right?
yes,
Like we see a community that has a power structure that looks like the community that lives
right,
there.
Right. And that's very a component of making one feel like they're part of that community.
Absolutely.
So you obviously you celebrate Kwanzaa every year, but as far as doing that in the community, are you able to get the word out so like you are able to get like a lot like families from the community involved?
Yes. What's interesting is like before COVID, which we always think about now, is like how things used to be, but as we start coming back together, then I think you can still see the energy that was there. But I mean, people are coming back, and we had fashion shows. We worked with the KCC College. We did presentations at Lakeview, Harper Creek. We was in those areas, and where we would present the Kwanzaa, and everybody was excited about it, that we participated with us and found it to be interesting. And so that helps bring the community together when we learn about the different cultures. So
And do you feel that the white community in Battle Creek participates in a fair level in Kwanzaa and Black culture?
Yes, we at our last event and before, we had proclamations coming from our mayor and recognizing that the contributions that bringing people together is what the Battle Creek theme is. We want this place to be a place where people can live and come together. And so as we do that, more and more people become aware of the Kwanzaa celebration. And like we say, it's not just for the African American culture, but all cultures, and that's how we learn. Like one of the things we did, even with the Federal Center, we was involved with quite a few different places where we was able to draw people in, and not just African American people, but other people that were interested in the cultural aspects of it and wanted to learn more about it.
Because it is a big
Yes.
piece of our culture in Battle Creek.
Yes,
right?
and it's been growing to the point of almost. Martin Luther King holiday is a big day, but this celebration is a celebration of the individual, the culture itself. So it's not one particular person or anything. And so that's what
Absolutely.
makes it such a family coming together approach. Yeah.
Speaking of that kind of environment, Dylan, can you speak to, as a training candidate, graduate, and community volunteer for co-op, there is a culture among our training candidates that isn't put in your training manual that says, hey, you should cleave together and cook meals together in the kitchen and talk about where you were born and where you came from. It's just something that happens. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So co-op just has this very like family-oriented culture where no matter where you came from or your ethnicity or what your faith or beliefs are, like everybody can be accepted for who they are and share a little bit of their background. Whether you came from poverty or wealth or middle class, like everybody has a story to tell. And so it's just really cool to experience like different cooking styles or learn like different people's backgrounds, and just touching base with all those different unique people is just a very cool place to call home or to call like your family. And you don't have to be blood or come from the same household just to consider yourself family. So it's just really cool to like have all those different walks of life come together and share food and share a dinner table, because that's what, in my mind, that's what creates a family. It's more than
Beautifully
just
said.
who you're born with.
Beautiful.
Well, Pastor Joe, I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening and educating us all a little more about the celebration around Kwanzaa and Black history and culture in our community.
Yes.
And I want to thank everybody out there in Battle Creek or beyond who joins us for the show Our View. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
Okay, thank you.